Okay. Good evening, everyone. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshunamilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. So I've given a little packet here. Actually, you can take this one also. And then if others come, they should share with each other. I have it here on my computer. So in chapter 10 is known as the Vibhuti Yoga chapter, because in this chapter, Krishna expands a little bit on the subject matter of Vibhuti. So we've been hearing this word a lot. And in the last passage, after Arjuna has spoken of his own realization of Krishna's divinity, Krishna himself having explored his own divinity with Krishna about himself. So Arjuna shares his own realization of Krishna's divinity. That was 12 through 15. And in verses 16 through 18, Arjuna begins to ask questions of Krishna to expand on the subject matter of his vibhuti, which he had only spoken of briefly in previous chapters. So if you look at this little PowerPoint thing, if you go to the 16th through 18th page, particularly the second bullet point on that page, we define what is a vibhuti there. And we've discussed this definition earlier, but just to review it, the bold statement, in short, vibhuti indicates the presence of the power of God in some particular outstanding or standing out sort of way. So thank you. So anything glorious encountered in this world is a diffusion of God's own glory into the world and an indicator of his greatness. So that bullet point also explains how the word vibhuti is broken down in Sanskrit, but we'll not discuss that here. So why does this come up in the middle 6 chapters of the Bhagavad-Gita, which is a section of the Bhagavad-Gita which is focused on bhakti yoga? Because the first 6 chapters of Bhagavad-Gita, as we've mentioned in these discussions many times, the first 6 chapters of Bhagavad-Gita, we encounter Krishna as the teacher of yoga. And as a teacher of yoga, he describes the different yoga systems by which one can realize one's own self. But in the middle 6 chapters of Bhagavad-Gita, Krishna switches his voice and becomes the deity of the book. He's not simply the teacher or the guru that teaches about yoga, but he's actually the deity of the book, to whom one is to offer their existence to, their mind, their intelligence, and ultimately their very soul. So he becomes God in the middle 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. He reveals himself as the Lord. So why does this topic of vibhuti come up in the middle 6 chapters, which is focused on that subject of bhakti and giving oneself over to God? So if you remember in chapter 9, when Krishna was describing the most confidential knowledge and the essential practice of bhakti, one has to remember God, mana bhava, right? Ma bhakto. One should always think of God. So in a world where God's presence is not obvious to us, how is that done? Right? In a world where you're not seeing Krishna's form, there's so many depictions of Krishna's form. In a world where you don't see God directly in that way, then how is it possible to remember the Lord? Just like if you don't see your lover or beloved directly before you, then it may be easy to forget such a lover, isn't it? Yes. And it happens all the time for people, right? Out of sight, out of mind, right? That's a slogan, but that's what happens when you're in a certain state of consciousness, right? Out of sight, out of mind. Of course, maybe in the beginning, you're like, feelings of separation, but then those get eroded real fast, and then it's just separation, no feelings. And then you get preoccupied with the world that you're actually encountering. So how is it possible to think of God in the world where his presence isn't obvious? So that's the third bullet point on the 16 through 18 slide that I have here. Just reading here, how can one living in this world constantly fix the mind on Krishna? Because Krishna said, Mamana Bhava, always think of me, or think of me. So how can one constantly fix the mind on Krishna, the essential element of the practice or existence of those devoted to Krishna? Right? Ma chitta magata prana. When Krishna was speaking about those who are in love with him, bhava samanvita. He said they're always thinking of him, machitta magata prana. Their life is given over to Krishna, just as one cannot live without eating food. Right? Just like when you don't have the food, then you think about food, isn't it? Yesterday was Ekadashi. So on Ekadashi, devotees don't eat grains and beans usually. All day we were thinking about eating grains, isn't it? It's hard to avoid because you feel so weak. In the temple, they give you prasad, but it looks like sludge. It is very nice, but it may have that appearance of, just like, you don't feel so you start thinking about eating, I think about eating cereal or something, some grain is there. So when you're hungry for something, your mind goes to that. So the devotee is hungry for Krishna. So his mind is always thinking of Krishna, Makata Prana. So if this is the essential element of those who are devoted to Krishna, how can I, as a soul in this world, a world where Krishna is present isn't obvious, how can I make my mind go to Krishna? And so in this way, Krishna discusses his vibhutis in this way. Going to that third bullet point, I'm just reading here. In which form does one in this world conceive of Krishna, who, though pervading everywhere, is not perceived? I put here example 7.7. If you go back to 7.7 of Bhagavad-Gita, Krishna mentions that he is like the thread of the pearl necklace, right? So the thread, you don't see the thread of the pearl necklace, you just see the pearls, but you don't see the thread that keeps them together. In the same way, I am like that thread which is maintaining existence. So you can see the existence, but you can't see the thread underneath it that is keeping everything together. So if his presence isn't so apparent to us, how are we to think of him? So Arjuna has asked this question. Please expand on your vibhutis more elaborately so that I, a soul walking in this world where your presence is somewhat hidden, can think of you. You understand? Very simple subject matter. So now we'll go to the 19 through 38 page or slide, as it were. I'm just going to read this section because I'm not going to go through each of the verses one by one because, for two reasons. Reason number one is a lot of the categories Krishna speaks about, a lot of the examples within the categories that Krishna speaks about are most Westerners won't be aware of, like an ocean of milk, or he speaks about many categories. He gives examples of things that we don't have, that aren't part of our culture. So that would take a long time to explain each and every element. So we don't want to do that. Rather, we just want to focus on the major categories that Krishna's bringing up. And then within each of those categories, he gives examples of vibhutis in those categories. And that way you get a general idea of the major categories and how different things within that category are representations of Krishna's own glory in this world. And then you can work on, if you want to become devoted to Krishna in the way that the Bhava Samanvita people are, then you can work on your own meditation on how to see Krishna in this world. You understand? So I'm just going to read from here, and I would advise or recommend or suggest that you can look at the section yourself, at the verses specifically, but you'll see many of the things that are maybe unfamiliar. So I'm just reading the first bullet points here. It's very straightforward. So Krishna says he will speak about his divine personal vibhutis as requested, beginning with an affirmation of himself as the source of the world. So just note that when he starts to discuss his vibhutis, he first mentions again, as he's already discussed in this chapter, that he is the source of everything. So this becomes an important point at the end. You'll see why it's an important point. So Krishna identifies with the following in this section as the essence of beings. So here's a couple examples here. I may not read every example in each of the categories, but here Krishna is the soul in every being's heart. He's the beginning, middle, and end of all beings. He's a consciousness of beings, the seed of all beings. He's the mind among the senses. These are some examples that Krishna gives as the essence of beings in this world. The virtues in people. When you see virtues in people, you find it to be a very glorious thing, isn't it? Someone is forgiving, someone is patient, someone is nowadays compassionate or empathic. So he says that that quality or that virtue is an example of one of his vibhutis. So that itself can create meditation on himself. So he says, virtues in people. Krishna is the wisdom of the wise. Of feminine things, he is fame, beauty, speech, memory, reason, firmness, and forgiveness. The splendor of the splendid, goodness of the good, right conduct among those seeking victory, and monarchs among men. Of course, nowadays we have a different image of monarchs, so that may not be the best example. But previously, monarchs were actually trained to be servants of the society. So that in Krishna's time, that was a good example. Nowadays, we don't have so much faith in such things. So Krishna says he's the traits of nature. So here's some examples. Krishna is the radiant sun among the luminaries. Of water bodies, the ocean. Of mountain ranges, the Himalayas. Of all trees, the fig tree. You're wondering how that gets selected. Why not banyan tree or some other tree? Of beasts, the king of beasts, the lion. Of wind, purifiers, the shark among great fish. Of rivers, the Ganges. Of months, I think that's a typo, trailhead.
Months,
trailhead. I think that's a typo. Yeah, that's a typo. Of seasons, flower-bearing spring. So now Krishna gives another category, sacred objects that one encounters in this world. Krishna is the Samaveda among the Vedas. So Vedas are the books of knowledge. The Samaveda is the particular book of knowledge dealing with all the hymns. They're very beautiful. The hymns of the various rituals that are performed, they're very captivating. When you hear some beautiful hymn song, you become captivated. So he says of all those books of knowledge, I'm that part that captivates the mind by the beautiful hymns. Of sounds, the one that does not perish, namely Om. Of offerings, the quiet chant, Japa. Of hymns, the great hymn, Gayatri. Of meters chanted. Of sciences, I'm the spiritual science of the self. Some typos are here. I didn't get a chance to check it out. Okay, so these are some brief categories that Krishna mentions, and he's mentioned these categories earlier in chapter 7, also in chapter 9, as I indicated here. In chapter 10, he also brings up a few other categories. So I'm just going to read off the categories without reading all the different examples, because these categories, the examples are not encountered unless you grew up in the Vedic culture or Indian culture. So it would take a long time to explain all those things here. So I'm just going to mention the categories that Krishna specifically elaborates on in chapter 10. So Krishna gives the category of cosmic forces. For example, he's the time among driving forces. Time is pushing everything. That's a very cosmic force. It is literally metaphysical. You can't see it, touch it, smell it, taste it, but its presence is all pervading and it's compelling. You cannot stop it. So he says of that cosmic force is me. Of verbal traits, he gives a category of verbal traits. Of those making claims, Krishna is the conclusion. So some argument is there, and someone can finally reach a conclusion that everyone can agree upon. And that conclusion is Krishna. They'll say like this, for example. Of social traits, this one is interesting. Krishna is dicing among deceivers. Someone who is expert at deceiving someone, that is also vibhuti, because it is extraordinary. When someone is able to deceive in such a magnificent way, then that is also Krishna. It's a vibhuti. Someone has that ability to do that. I like this one also. I am silence among secrets. That is a very nice one. Someone who's able to keep a secret by remaining silent. That is extraordinary. especially in the age of Kali. You like confide in someone, and not 5 minutes later, everyone in the building knows your business. You confide in someone, you walk in the room, and everyone's like, and you like, going to get your prasadam or something. You're like, why is everyone looking at me? And then you go, did you tell anyone? You're like, nah, well, okay, I told this one person, but I told them not to tell anyone. And then everyone in the room knows. So someone can keep a secret. That is a great opulence, actually. It's a Vibhuti of the Lord. He's mentioned that here. So the best of celestial groups. So celestial groups are like demigods. These are categories that we're not so familiar with in the Western world. But he mentions some of the demigods that are encountered in the Vedic literatures. So of those various celestial beings, there are those who are outstanding, or they stand out. And Krishna says that is me. So he's making that point. Krishna gives the category of a divine paragon of groups that includes celestials and humans. So there are certain groups that stand out in Vedic history either for their prowess or for their artistic works. Like, for example, Krishna's giving Gandharvas, they're celestial like singers. And amongst them, there is one who's very much standing out. So Krishna says that is himself. So he's a celestial exemplars of nature. And he's the priests and sages. So they're famous sages in Vedic history that really stand out. So Krishna is saying he is that. So so you can look at these different categories and study them. But this last bullet point on this particular page is what's really important to kind of catch all. So I'm going to read this. This is a very important point. So note, these identity verses, we're calling these identity verses, right? Because Krishna's identifying with these various aspects of nature. And in India, you'll find so many people saying that the God is everything. They say like this, the God is everything. So everything is God. They think like, and then I'll quote Bhagavad-Gita also. Krishna says he is this, he is that, he is that. So that means everything is God actually. So no need to worship God as independent of you, because everything is God. This is the general understanding you will encounter, especially among Hindus. When I first started getting into Eastern philosophy, I also came to the conclusion that I was God. But it was quite strange because I thought that I was a part of God. And because I was a part of him, I am also God. That was my thinking. But when I would communicate it, I would just say I'm God. And I shared this story many times, but when I first came to that conclusion, I remember my mom cooked dinner and she had me sit down. She said, Jai, my name was Yeshua. She said, say prayer. And I didn't want to say prayer because I thought it was ridiculous because I'm God. So she was like, Yeshua, say prayer. And I kind of like looked at her and she said, say prayer. It got a little bit firmer. And I was like, well, I don't want to say prayer. I think it's ridiculous. And I have been saying prayer so many years. She said, why do you say like that? And I said, because I'm God. And so immediately she was like, and I said, no, don't worry. You are also God. But the difference is I know it and you don't. I actually said like this to her. She like looked at me. She said, if you don't sit down and say prayer. And I got scared. So I sat down and said a prayer. So then I was like, maybe I'm not God, because how am I so scared of my little mom? She was like so much smaller than me. And I'm like nervous, I'm like, I'm God. I'm like cracking a sweat, starting to tremble a little bit. Like, don't worry, you also God. So I was like, I'm so much afraid of a tiny lady. So I said, maybe I need to refine my understanding of how I am God. So from these identity verses, many people will come to such conclusion if they read Bhagavad-Gita by themselves that they are also God, because Krishna's identifying himself with so many aspects of nature, including the soul itself. So this note is very important. Note these identity verses, and I've given the sections where you'll find these identity verses in Gita. Verses wherein Krishna expresses identity with something or someone is framed by origin verses. So whenever you look at any of the identity verses in the Bhagavad Gita, you'll see at the beginning of that section and at the end of that section, there's verses about Krishna being the origin of things. So there are identity verses and then there are origin verses. You understand? So Just note that. Verses which indicates Krishna as the source of all. Thus, Krishna identifies with his creation because he infuses it with his glory, vibhuti, yet he stands above it and sustains it. He is one and different, just as the sunshine is simultaneously the sun and different from it. You understand this point? Another example may be given. Sometimes a father may identify with the son, or someone looking at the son may identify the son with the father, because he is the son of that individual. So, like sometimes when I was getting in trouble, my mom would say, I see so much of your dad in you, you know. It was meant to be maybe not a glorification, but sometimes you identify someone, or Prabhupada is another example. When a mother sees the shoes of her child, she sees her child. Although there's difference between the child and the shoes, like the baby shoes, when she sees the shoes, all the feelings that she feels for the child are invoked by seeing the shoes. So there's a sense of oneness of those shoes with the child, and yet they're different. But that oneness is there because of the connection with the child. That may be another example that I've heard Prabhupada give. So in the same way, Krishna's identifying with nature because he's the source of nature. And he infuses his own glory or energy into it. So it has a relationship with him, and yet it stands apart from him. Does it make sense? Or the example I'm giving here in the note also, it is like the sun and the sunshine. There's sameness and difference simultaneously. Right? The sunshine is also the sun, so much so that we say, man, the sun is very hot today. But if it was fully the sun, then we would be finished. So it is the sun. Sunshine is the sun, but it is also different simultaneously. So in this way, Krishna identifies with nature because it's coming from him, but he stands above it. He's different from it at the same time. Is this point clear? Is it coming across? So this is very important to note. So last slide here, this is 39 through 42. Just glossing these verses. So Krishna ends his description by again affirming his being the source of all he has spoken of. Right? Again, all the identity verses are framed by origin verses. So here he ends his discussion of his identification with matter by saying he's the source of everything. Concluding that this description was just a tiny, insignificant portion of his divine glory, vibhuti, which is indeed inexhaustible. In fact, everything we're experiencing in life is actually vibhuti of the Lord, necessarily, because everything is actually his glory. It's a manifestation of his power, his energy. The scent of a flower, the breeze. I remember reading in one purport in the 3rd chapter of Bhagavad-Gita where Srila Prabhupada remarks that no one can live without the breeze. And I remember when I first read that, I was like, it just seems so like too specific. No one can live without the breeze. And then you have like a really hot day in New York, and then the breeze comes, and it's quite amazing. So you realize that is also vibhuti of the Lord. Everything actually we're experiencing in life is the glory of God. So everything, actually to talk about God is inexhaustible. That's why he said, I've only given some categories. I've given a few examples within those categories. But actually, I can go on talking about this forever because it's literally inexhaustible. So I'm just giving you some general ideas, and now you work on your own meditation. You work on how you can connect the things that you're seeing in this world to understanding that this is God's glory, the ability to do art, to sing, to think certain thoughts that give great influence over others. All these things are vibhutis of the Lord. I gave an example one time of being able to communicate in such a way that people are compelled to follow you. I gave the example of Martin Luther King Jr. last time, a powerful orator, but I could give the example of Hitler also, who was also a very powerful orator. I mean, he got whole countries to stand behind him because of that vibhuti of the Lord. So all of these things are God's glory. It's literally an inexhaustible list. So for the devoted, they see God everywhere. And for the non-devoted, they don't see God anywhere. It's a very interesting, unique. And as Krishna himself says this in Gita 269, I often like to quote this verse, Ya nisha sarabhutana, yasyam jagrati samyami, tasham jagrati bhutani, sanisha pashatomani. So for what is night for common man is time of awakening for the self-control, the enlightened person. And what is the time of awakening for common man is night for the introspective sage. What does this verse mean? That the enlightened and the unenlightened are awake and asleep to two different realities. So the reality that the enlightened is, or let me start with the unenlightened. The reality that the unenlightened is awakened to is the world of apparent reality. They don't see what's underneath that reality, the thread keeping everything together, using Krishna's example. And the enlightened is awake to that thread reality, the sort of meta-narrative, the underpinnings of nature. And they also see the apparent reality, but they're asleep to it in the sense that they don't engage with the conventional world in the same way that the unenlightened do. Because they know that there's more to the apparent reality than what meets the eye. Sanisha Pashato Muni. Sanisha means they're asleep to the apparent reality. Pashato, but they see it. They see the apparent reality, but they're asleep to it in the sense that they don't try to exploit it as independent of God. Rather, they see it as God's glory. And once you see it in that way, your engagement with it changes dramatically. Just like I've given an example before, when you look at a phone impersonally, suppose you see a phone on the ground, or a wallet, that's a good example. Suppose you see a wallet on the ground. When you see it impersonally, you say Jai. Let's see what's in there. Oh, look, nice $100 in there, cool. And you put it in your pocket. But if you see it personally, this is such and such wallet, then your engagement with it changes dramatically. Now I will not think to steal the money, rather I will think to give it back to the person to whom it belongs, right? That is just as little shift, isn't it? If you see wallet, suppose there's a kirtan, you see wallet is there, and it's no one's wallet, and you see it impersonally, then you're like, anyway, it's no one's wallet, no one's claiming it. I'll give it, I mean, I'm a good person, but this is just sitting there. Finders keepers, it's natural. But as soon as you open the wallet and you see the ID picture, all right, I got it. Jai Jagannath, again, losing stuff. All right, Jai, I found your wallet. I take the wallet, see if the money is still inside. You understand that little shift. So the Munis, they see the world of apparent reality, but they're asleep to that exploitative mentality because they also see the underlying source, maintainer of that reality, that is Krishna. So that dramatically changes how they engage with the world. You understand? So Krishna concludes the second bullet point in this last page. He assures Arjuna that any extraordinary thing perceived in this world is a spark of his splendor. And that indeed, by just a portion of himself, he is manifested such extraordinary phenomena. So even this world, Krishna is saying, actually is a spark of his splendor. And there's no question of talking about it exhaustively. If all this amazing thing that we're experiencing is just a spark, what to speak of the whole fire? So what is the conclusion of this chapter? And this conclusion is very important. The world is the deity, but the identification is asymmetrical. So this is the conclusion. It is asymmetrical. So when Krishna says, I am that, he's identifying, but the identity is not symmetrical. So he is this and this is him. It is not, it is asymmetrical. I am that because it comes from me, but this thing is not me also at the same time. And because I stand apart from it, it is my energy. I'm the support for it. I'm the source of that. So when people hear identity verses in the Bhagavad-Gita, or at least when the devotee hears identity verses in the Bhagavad-Gita, they know that that identification is asymmetrical. So just because I am part and parcel of God, I'm also God in that sense. And Prabhupada writes like that in chapter 9. We are tiny Christians, he says. Krishna is the big Krishna, we're tiny Krishna. At the same time, we are not Krishna. The identification is not symmetrical. So we don't have God's power, all of his qualities. Sometimes we say like this, we're just like the drop of water. So the drop of water has all the qualities of the ocean. But that isn't true, actually, right? The drop of water has some of the qualities of the ocean. It actually has very few of them. It may be salty, but the drop of water doesn't have waves. The drop of water doesn't have aquatics in it. So there are many differences between the whole ocean and a drop of water. So the identification is asymmetrical. It's not symmetrical. It's not even. So that is the idea. So that this world is God himself. It is a deity, but it's not fully him. Just reading this last point. In other words, the world is nothing but the deity, but it is a small part of his total existence. God is not only transcendent, existing apart from the world and doing his own thing, but immanent within the world, maintaining and pervading it with his extraordinary glory. So this is the conclusion of this 10th chapter. And again, the sense, one of the important sense of this chapter is to help us build a meditation for ourselves of thinking of Krishna in a world where his presence is not always apparent to us, unless we practice seeing that connection of the world with his glory. Okay? So, as I had mentioned before, I wanted to cover this section fast. So I did it as fast as I could, covering all these verses in one shot. Are there any questions about what has been spoken here? Otherwise, we will take some comment. Yeah.
Someone else still formulating.
Just formulating it. Okay, any questions or comments?
So I guess this question is going to be very rambling.
Okay.
Because I haven't really figured out the words here.
Okay.
But so experiencing the world as, like seeing the vibhutis of Krishna in like all these things, like, taste the water, all that. So seeing that as like just like an extension of Krishna, like, is it as opposed to like the personality of Krishna, right? So like I'm confused out. So you mentioned earlier that you see a wallet, like, and you look at it personally, like it prevents like exploitation.
Right.
Using it for the wrong purpose, effectively.
Right.
But I feel like I don't really understand how that's the same, or how that lines up with saying that all these things are not Krishna himself, they're just like things that he just expands into. Like, I guess that's like my question. Does that make sense? Like what I'm trying to convey?
Yes. How do you hear this question?
I guess it means like, or I don't know, but I think like is like physically extending into everything, or is it like his like essence, and how exactly does that, like with the wallet thing, like us change, like the whole example of the wallet was like we change our perception of like how we approach the wallet depending on our mindset, right? So I guess like what form does Krishna take? Is it like a mindset? Is it like is it just his like ideals and values, or is it like his essence? I guess that's what
I think it was close. You want to find a specific bullet point.
He with his glory,
Yes.
but he stands above it and sustains it. So Krishna, the person, is separate from all these things.
Yes.
But still, we approach all these things in a personal manner to.
Yes. Okay. So Prabhupada, so Krishna stands separate from all these energies, and yet we approach the energy personally, as if Krishna's presence is personally there. So how is that reconciled if he stands apart from it? So a very simple answer, or a simple way that Prabhupada would kind of answer this sort of question. He would say, when we said Mother Nature, Prabhupada would say, whose nature is it? There's nature, but whose nature is it? So in the same example I gave earlier, when the mother sees the shoes of her child, the shoes are not her child. They're very different from the child. And yet when she sees the shoes of the child, it invokes a personal understanding or it invokes actually all the feelings that she has for the child. And so the way she approaches those shoes are informed by that memory of her child, the loving feelings and so on. In the same way, although this energy stands apart from God, it is his energy. It is not that it's a separate energy that is generated from some other source, but rather it is his energy. And so knowing that to be the energy of God, when seeing it, it naturally invokes memory of God himself and all the feelings that comes along with that memory of God. And that does changes how you deal with his energy.
So basically what you're saying is like, this is a lot of analogy. Everything that we're saying is, we're basically just walking around in Krishna's wallet.
You can say, okay, using the wallet analogy, you can say, yes, we're basically walking around Krishna's wallet. It's a little bit weird way of articulating that, but yes, it is. Everything is his energy. So once you understand it as his, then it invokes memory of Krishna. And then immediately with that invoking of memory of Krishna, it changes how you deal with his energy. Another example may be given when you see a child, the same different example, but same point. When you see a child, you may not have any particular feelings for the child. Like you may want to beat them, they're making so much noise or whatever. But then you say, oh, this is Nam Rasa's child, Gaur Chandra, his favorite child in Bhakti Center now. So you say, this is Gaur Chandra. Then all of a sudden, remembering Nam Rasa, here's your dear friend. You say, oh, this is Gaur Chandra, this is Nam Rasa's child. Then immediately your attitude is switched towards the child itself. So there's so many examples that can be given in this way. But the idea is to recognize that there's a relationship between the energy and the energetic source. So in the material world, we separate the two. Modern science, for example, or the modern secular world, they separate the energy from the source, from like a deity. So once they see the energy separate from the source, then it's up for grabs, you can exploit it, as science has tried to do effectively. Now, in some parts of the world, I think in India and I think also in Australia, the rivers have got rights now, like legally. And they started looking at the river basically as a person, and they've given the rivers rights. I saw an article about this a year ago, I think, in Australia, and I think in India also. Ganga has rights, and I think one river in Australia has rights. They've given the same rights that you will give a human being. So in Vedic culture, they used to connect all the sort of celestial things that we encounter in nature with some deity. And so you weren't able to just exploit matter because it belonged to some deity. You had to propitiate the deity of that particular element. And then you will engage with it after supplicating yourself before the deity. Like most ancient cultures seem to have some element of that, supplicating yourself before a deity, before engaging with it. So why was that? That prevents, because that means that you see the relationship between the source of that energy and the energy itself. So that changes how you engage with the energy. So this is the whole idea. If you see this world as God's energy, then naturally that changes how you engage with it, even though it's separate from him in his own swarup, in his own form, but it is still his energy. And therefore, knowing it to be his energy, you engage with it in a particular way. In other words, what basically happens is that you start to see the whole world as sacred. Now we see the whole world, in the secular world, we see everything as profane, basically, and mundane. And therefore, you become kind of nihilistic. It doesn't really matter. Just enjoy until you die. That's basically the best option that you more or less have. But in a God-conscious mind, you see the whole world is sacred because it's God's energy. The soul is sacred. The earth is sacred. People are sacred. Animals are sacred. Everything is sacred, actually, because it is God's energy. And so you engage accordingly. So this is how it's meant to help us shift our consciousness, this sort of practice. Therefore, it comes in this bhakti section, seeing the world as God's vibhuti, because it will help change your consciousness. So you have to come up with your own, and not come up, but you can also practice this yourself. Just try it out for one day, or if that's too long, then try it out for 1 hour. If that's too long, try it out for a half hour. Just meditating on the world as sacred because it's God's energy. It's very difficult to do even for 1 hour. As soon as you see something enjoyable, you forget. And it goes back to being mundane. So this is the idea of this, one of the important ideas of this section. Okay. Any other comment, question? Yes. No, it can be a devastating force also. That also invokes astonishment and wonder, right? A very powerful tornado or an earthquake. And just like modern science or the modern world, they're so proud of their technological advancements. All it takes is a little bit of extra snow and everything's finished. I remember in Chicago, Chicago's horrible with the winter time, it's very bad. But I remember one year, this was maybe 4 or 5 years ago, there was a snow and it was just coming down so lightly. It started like in the afternoon. By the evening, the snow went up like I don't know, maybe a couple of feet or something. And we had this whole huge lane called Lakeshore Drive. It's like a long, how do you call this? Like, not road, but like one of the main streets in Chicago. It's right next to the lake. And the whole thing, it stretches for about, I don't know, 20 or 30 miles, maybe more. And the whole thing got completely shut down. And people had to literally get out of their cars and run to safety because it was just piling up so high. People were getting buried in their cars, and it was very scary. And I remember seeing on the news, just laughing, like, all it takes is a little bit of extra snow, and your modern civilization is finished. That is also vibhuti. This of soft things, I'm the snow, that can devastate your whole civilization. Or you go to LA and some earthquake is there, and it's very destructive force. That is also very astonishing. You see a very powerful destructive force. Also, there's a destruction of the entire universe at one point. Krishna will bring this up also. That is very astonishing. And that is also a vibhuti. So everything reminds such a devotee of God. So it is not that just the positive things as such as we see it in the world of duality, but also the so-called negative things also give memory. So, okay. So this is something we have to work on, obviously. We're creatures of duality. So it's very hard to see the negative as something also manifesting God. As such, it is nature.
Why does it manifest in nature?
Well, because nature is composed of the three gunas, right? So in creation and passion, part of nature, it creates. And then goodness, part of nature, it maintains. And why does fire burn instead of cool? Why does water cool instead of burn? So these sort of questions that we cannot answer so much. But nature we see has a cycle. There's creation, there's maintenance and destruction. So destruction is also part of his nature that we're experiencing. So even that destruction can remind someone of Krishna. So it doesn't deviate them from their meditation. That's why you see all these really great yogis and mystics and saints and different traditions also. They're basically undaunted even by like horrible things, internally undaunted. Because everything is manifestation of God's glory. That's very hard for a creature of duality to embrace. Because we're very fixed, something's positive, something's negative. Actually, everything's a manifestation of his glory. Rather it's his nature or material nature or his spiritual nature. Now, spiritual people are interested in spiritual nature, but they also understand the material nature, and they're not daunted by it or bewildered. So, not so easy to embrace this point. So you can hear about the good stuff and get inspired. Then when we become more Krishna conscious, then we'll see everything. I remember Hurricane Katrina. When Hurricane Katrina hit some years ago, there was a picture of this black guy sitting on a rocking chair. His whole house got completely like devastated. And it was just like debris everywhere. And there was this old guy sitting in a rocking chair, like this huge smile on his face. And the caption read something to the effect that he was just glorifying God and everything was just God's glory. Like everything was just devastated. And he was just sitting in a rocking chair, like smiling. The caption was there and they had some caption about how he was explaining this is God's glory and something like that. I remember being kind of like, wow, that's a realization right there. Can you imagine this sitting in rocking chairs? Like, no house, no car, nothing. Just debris everywhere. He would seem like undaunted. Now, I don't know how advanced he was in his actual consciousness. That was just a caption. 2 captions later. Who knows? But in that one picture, he was, undaunted, saying that this is God also. So we only want to see God in our understanding of what is beauty. If you see Prabhupada's story, I recommend everyone read this book, Prabhupada Lilamrita. You can hear about Prabhupada's life. It's a very extraordinary book. But you'll find that when God shows his special mercy to his devotee, then he begins to take everything away. Tadanam Shanai means gradually. I always say gradually because if he does it at once, we might become atheists. So he gradually takes, in that way, the devotee becomes ruined and no one likes him anymore. And he feels that he, being forsaken, he can only take shelter of God himself. So there's a verse like this in Bhagavad-Gita, very nice. So every time anything like horrible was happening in Prabhupada's life, he would simply laugh and then he would quote this verse. You can read it. And I found that to be very inspiring, that he was always seeing sort of the direction of God in his life, even in those moments. So that's why we have to learn from saintly persons about what is absolute truth. Absolute truth means it's all good. And when you're in the world of duality, something's good and something's bad. Of course, when you're dealing empirically or conventionally, there's some level of practicality. But in terms of their inner disposition, they can understand the presence of God also. I'm gonna end with this. When I read the commentaries of a lot of our acharyas 500 years ago, they were under the subjugation of Islam. And Islam was very brutal at that time. I don't even know, but that time Islam was very brutal. And India was deeply subjugated by Islam. So when you read the commentaries of the acharyas, they never bring up anything about that. Like what they were undergoing, what type of abuse that was happening. Vrindavan was devastated. At one point, they had to move all the deities from Vrindavan to Jaipur, where they were protected by certain kings, because they were coming. The Islam soldiers were coming and destroying all the deities, destroying the temples. There's like very horrible things where they were killing brahmanas, chopping necks, everything. Like really horrible things were happening. It doesn't appear anywhere in the commentaries of the acharyas. Like, no, this was going on, that was happening, this was happening. All they were talking about were the glories of Krishna. And some sentences would come up how because of the Nawab, they couldn't do this. And so they did this thing to glorify Krishna, that thing. But there was no like hard feelings, no, I can't believe this is happening. Nothing like that. It was just God's glories being discussed. I always found it to be very remarkable reading the commentaries, even though they were themselves experiencing intensely the subjugation. But for them, there was no problem. They were just thinking about Krishna and writing about Krishna. So it gives you, again, if you study saints, it gives you a lot of insight into the inner world of absolute truth, where they're just saying, again, the underlying reality of everything and not just what's happening apparently. So anyway, very nice practice for us to do. Good luck. I'm sure we'll all fail many times before we become successful. So we'll stop there. Hari Om Tat Sat. Bhagavad-Gita ki jai.